Good evening and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Nick Blumberg. Federal prosecutors drop all charges against Broadview protesters after stunning misconduct allegations.
A federal judge says she was incredibly shocked by the behavior of prosecutors, arguing they violated the trust placed in them. Meantime, a Cook County judge denies a bid to appoint a special prosecutor charged with investigating Midway Blitz misconduct claims.
When compromise is reached, people don't leave happy. I know I'm not happy about this. I'm quite heartbroken.
Mayor Brandon Johnson is forced to accept a compromise measure delaying the phase-out of tipped minimum wage for 2 years.
The mayor has no plan. He has come up with no plan at all about how the Bears would end up in the city of Chicago.
Amid the debate over the new Bears stadium, Governor J.B. Pritzker throws cold water on last-minute claims that Chicago could still be in the running.
In order to have a thriving city, we need to have a safe public transportation system.
Cook County State's Attorney Eileen Burke expands her office's focus on prosecuting crimes on transit to include Metra, PACE, and an array of law enforcement agencies.
And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are our own Matt Masterson of WTTW News, Zreen Syed of the Chicago Tribune. Also from the Chicago Tribune, Talia Soglin and Maxwell Evans of Block Club Chicago. Thank you all for being here. Let's get right to it. Matt, you had a busy week, lots of stuff to cover. As we mentioned, all the remaining charges dropped against the remaining Broadview defendants. Very sharp words from the judge for federal prosecutors. And now the defendants' attorneys are out with a new demand today. So fill us in on all that happened this week.
It was quite a shocking day yesterday to see Andrew Boutros, the U.S. attorney, step in and voluntarily dismiss these charges after these wide-scale allegations of misconduct that were detailed ahead of this grand jury that indicted these protesters months ago. They were accused of breaking the trust, misleading the grand jury, misleading the court, misleading defense attorneys about what went on to secure these charges. It's behavior that you really have never seen at the federal courthouse. I've never seen it. People who've worked there much longer than me said the same thing, that they've never seen anything like this, that they excused grand jurors who didn't like how they presented the case. There was tension between them. They were vouching for the quality of the case, basically saying we wouldn't have brought this if it wasn't warranted. They were having ex parte communications outside of the grand jury room with members of the grand jury. This is all just truly baffling. That's what Judge April Perry found. That's what the defense attorneys who just all learned this yesterday found. And some of these defense attorneys in this case were former federal prosecutors who worked in this office. They said they were shocked. They were sickened by this behavior. They've never seen anything like this before, and it led to the end of a case that really, it felt like it was going this way a little bit. There were initially 6 people charged. They dropped all charges against 2. They dropped the top conspiracy count last month. They were only going to go to trial on misdemeanor charges at this point. But still, the way this case wrapped up was just another shock in how this all worked.
And what did we hear today? There was a new development from some demands from the defense attorneys for these folks.
Yeah, defense attorneys want the federal government to maintain all records related to these grand jury proceedings. They want us, they're going to seek possible sanctions against the prosecutors who handled this case for prosecutorial misconduct, and they want all these things secured. Now, typically, that wouldn't be a big ask, but with the trust that is broken, Judge April Perry said yesterday her trust was broken in the prosecutors who handled this case. They need an order to make sure these records are maintained. Some of these records were concealed from the court going into this. This is the federal courthouse in Chicago is one of the most storied and well-respected prosecutorial offices in the country. This is the office that they prosecuted Al Capone. Right. They brought down governors in Illinois. More recently they've secured convictions against Mike Madigan, R. Kelly, Ed Burke, and now they're misleading grand jurors just to secure case charges in a case like this. It was truly wild.
Maxwell, just such a shocking collapse to this case. Essentially, as Matt's laying out, that it claims that prosecutors sort of tampered with a grand jury. Were you surprised to see, even though it was, maybe trending toward the charges getting dropped or just very minor charges, were you surprised to see it end so dramatically?
Yeah, to be honest, this is like reality TV levels of craziness. Like, I don't think that anybody would have expected something like this to happen in a case that has taken so much precedence in local news and national news. Like, this isn't some minor case that nobody's aware of. This is a serious case about a serious issue that's affecting the entire nation. So, yeah, absolutely shocked to see something like this would have happened.
Yeah. Go ahead.
defense attorneys also in this case had previously asked if this case was politically motivated by the Trump administration. The prosecutors in this case basically said no. They never provided any evidence that there was any communication coming from the Trump administration from Washington to pursue these charges against these defendants who are all related to Democratic politics in one way or another. Again, with the trust violation that's happened in this, that needs to be looked at again. Judge Perry said that these defendants are likely entitled to another hearing over whether this was a vindictive prosecution against them. And we'll see if that actually goes forward. But this is something that defense attorneys might throw out, that their clients are being maligned some way or another, but this is truly another level.
Yeah, and you have to imagine this could color other potential prosecutions and make it tougher for, assistant U.S. attorneys, even if they do have a legit case.
This is one of dozens of cases that came out of Operation Midway Blitz, and this is the first one, hopefully the only one, where we see there's this level of misconduct, but we don't know. These grand jury processes are behind closed doors, and if defense attorneys didn't push for Perry to read these transcripts, we may have never got to this point.
All right, sticking with you for a second, another high-profile ruling this week, a judge denying the effort for a Midway Blitz special prosecutor. Why did that effort fall short?
Judge Eric Oretic yesterday denied this push from hundreds of petitioners. The head of the Illinois Accountability Commission was one of these petitioners, a lot of elected officials. They said that Eileen Burke, the Cook County State's attorney, had not done any investigation. She had done nothing to look into any of the cases against federal officers for their misconduct during Operation Midway Blitz. That includes the shooting of Miramar Martinez, of Silverio Villegas Gonzalez. She had taken no action to pursue charges in that. Now, she has maintained that her office cannot start these investigations. She can only bring charges when evidence has been presented to her by local law enforcement. Judge Raddick yesterday agreed. She said that it needs to be police who investigate these first. Obviously, the Illinois State Police earlier this month they did launch an investigation into the murder of Silverio Villegas Gonzalez, and Odile Burke's office is assisting in that. They say that's what they can do. When somebody else starts an investigation, they can help, but they can't bring these charges on their own.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that investigation plays out. Talia, another story with State's Attorney Odile Burke this week, talking about another high-profile issue, crime on public transit. What's her new initiative here?
Yeah, it's a task force that will involve meetings of representatives from the transit agencies, so CTA, Metra, and PACE, as well as local law enforcement, her office, and then even federal law enforcement. Essentially having meetings, she says, will help strengthen prosecutorial efforts of transit crime.
And of course, this is all in advance of the soon to kick off effort of a big regional overhaul of Chicago area public transit, and a lot of efforts along similar lines kind of baked into that legislation.
Absolutely, there are many task forces. There's an internal, 3 of them. There's an internal state's attorney's office task force. There's this now kind of external task force, and then there's a task force to come that will be led by the sheriff's office, also to do crime fighting on public transit.
Lawmakers love a task force, and I'm sure we'll learn all about them. All right, Zareen, in some city council news, big debate earlier this year that seemed like it had maybe been settled about the phase out of tip minimum wage. As of this week, still set to happen, but with a 2-year delay. It seems like sort of a compromise effort that alders tried to reach between folks like restaurant workers and small business owners.
Yeah, so what the measure means is that Chicago's tip workers will no longer receive a city-ordered wage boost, which was supposed to be scheduled for July 1st of this year and then July 1st of next year. So now they're going to have to wait 2 years. And they're looking at it from 2 different angles. So the supporters of the measure are saying that it does help mitigate some of the economic barriers and pitfalls that Chicago's hospitality industry has faced over the last year. But the opponents of the bill are saying, well, it's going to hurt the most Chicago's vulnerable hospitality workers that are relying on these wages and relying on these increases probably to make ends meet.
Yeah, and backers saying a lot of black and brown folks, a lot of women, a lot of low-income Chicagoans certainly affected here. Some other city council news this week, Matt. Alders voting officers with ties to extremist organizations shouldn't be allowed to serve on the Chicago Police Department. How exactly will that work?
This had previously been handled internally by the Chicago Police Department. Their internal investigations would look into these extremist ties to officers. This pushes that out to the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. So this will be a more external look at these ties, and if these officers are found to be connected to these extremist groups or have extremist posts, they could face consequences from further out than just an internal investigation.
It'd be interesting to see how much this is actually used, if it actually goes into effect, or becomes a major issue here.
Right. We'll see how many actually get investigated for this.
Yeah. Maxwell, a lot of attention on data centers in recent years. As you reported, the city's Department of the Environment, they just hosted a community conversation on that issue. What did residents have to say?
Yeah, so I was actually kind of surprised. This event had been listed as sold out ahead of time. I mean, free event, but at capacity ahead of time. And it was really surprising to me to hear the panelists also were generally against the development of centers, or at least had major concerns about the environmental impacts, the economic impacts, the impacts on day-to-day life in neighborhoods that host them. And so, yeah, I was a little surprised to see that it wasn't kind of a both sides situation in which you're being presented with tons of benefits, tons of drawbacks. It was a conversation really focused on the drawbacks, and to be honest, I think that's what the majority of the audience was aligned with and expecting as well. So
yeah, and what are the next steps for this panel that's looking into the issue?
Yeah, so they'll be making a series of policy recommendations by the end of next month. They have a deadline of June 30th to gather the input from things like this meeting, their own research into the issue, and then present that to City Council. So yeah, there should be some sort of policy recommendations coming out of that. I don't believe there's a requirement for any legislation specifically to be drafted or created out of it, but at least policy recommendations to guide City Council on how to approach what's very clearly a pressing issue, not just in Chicago, Chicagoland, but nationwide.
Yeah, and of course, you know, a lot of these data centers in the city, in the suburbs, they're in communities that already have, you know, environmental impacts from, you know, massive distribution warehouses that have sprung up over the last decade. I mean, Zareen, you have to imagine that makes some residents particularly upset about adding data centers on top of all that truck traffic.
Absolutely, and I feel like there's so many other issues that are happening within these communities that a data center just adds like, okay, now this now. So it's like people don't really know where to focus their rage at.
Yeah.
Is it an environmental issue? Is it like an economic issue? There's just a lot to consider.
And I would also add that the city's environmental people were saying that the mega hyperscale data centers that you'll see in areas like Joliet, proposed for Joliet, Aurora, that kind of thing, Chicago simply doesn't have the space for.
Right.
So within the city limits, it is these smaller to medium-sized data centers, which obviously still have their own concerns about power draw, water usage, all the environmental concerns. But when you're thinking about like hundreds of acres, there just simply isn't the land, or at this point, the interest in developing land into those. So they really press that these are small to mid-sized data centers that concern the actual city limits, but that even our power supply is impacted by these larger ones in our outer regions and our suburbs. So yeah.
Yeah, and with a lot of folks seeing their you know, electricity bills going up recently and expected to go up more, you know, people are going to be very interested in where this all goes. Turning back to transit for a minute, Talia, as we said, this overhaul kicking into high gear, or maybe there's a better transit-related metaphor to use there this year.
Picking up steam.
Picking up steam, there we go, thank you. But you know, before that happens, Mayor Brandon Johnson, you reported making a last-minute effort to see if we can get a permanent CTA president installed. This is after nearly a year and a half with an interim leader. What are the details there?
Yeah, so Mayor Johnson is making this kind of last minute push to get a permanent leader in at CTA just weeks before this overhaul takes effect. One of the things the new transit legislation will do is remove some of the power ultimately that the mayor has over making that appointment. Other people get a say now too. So he sent a letter to the CTA board chair on May 7th saying essentially, let's move quickly, let's get someone in, work with me here. You know, it is not clear if the board is going to take him up on that. They certainly didn't vote on anything at their last meeting. They don't have another regular meeting scheduled before June 1st.
Yeah, and of course there was that you know, kind of hastily scheduled special meeting of the board that a lot of folks thought was based on the mayor's effort to get his choice in the city COO. You know, is there any sense of whether that kind of fraught process that previously played out might affect what happens here?
We shall see. I mean, I think, you know, certainly it's ruffled some feathers. People saying, you know, you had more than a year to do this and now things are changing. Why make this change now? It's obviously, you know, also not unusual for a agency to have had an interim leader for so long under this particular administration.
Fair enough. And I mean, you know, there have been a lot of eyes on the transit agency. It's struggled over the last several years. There was a lot of negative attention directed at its, you know, former president, Dorval Carter. You know, Maxwell, does it feel like some of that has cooled off, you know, with the interim leader taking over and some of these issues improving? Yeah,
I've actually been a little surprised at how much positive I've heard just out in the neighborhoods covering transit in the community, that people seem to like the interim leader. And the idea that this has taken so long, while there is, at least to my understanding, seemingly approval of what she's been doing in office, yeah, it's been a little confusing, to be honest.
Well, as things often are for reporters. All right, Matt, there's a new report looking into State's Attorney O'Neill Burke's policies, specifically about prison terms for retail theft, which they found doubled last year. Is that necessarily a surprise? It's been a big focus for her office.
No, it's certainly not a surprise. She ran on kind of reversing some of the policies that Kim Foxx had put into place, specifically regarding retail theft. Kim Foxx had lowered increased the threshold for which she would seek charges. Eileen O'Neill Burke immediately lowered that down to the state level. So it's not at all a surprise that we're seeing more of these convictions in these types of cases. She has more recently said this isn't a huge priority of hers. She's very focused on gun crimes. She's repeatedly said throughout her administration. This is sort of just a byproduct of it. Kim Foxx had set the level, I believe, at $1,000, where they would not pursue charges unless the amount of retail theft had exceeded that. Under O'Neill Burke, it's down to around $300. Just with that gap, it's led to a lot more charges being pursued by her office.
Yeah, and of course, there's still a lot of debate among policymakers about how much of an actual deterrent that is, because there are so many, various factors that contribute to why folks commit these crimes.
Right. It's not just that there's more convictions. That means the number of these cases are going up. It's likely that they're more steady, but her office is just seeking more charges than her predecessor had been doing.
Yeah. Talia, we heard this week another twist of the knife when it comes to Chicago's much-hated parking meter deal. What's the latest on that saga?
Yeah, I mean, I think we still have like 57 more years on this notorious
like
deal,
that.
something like
could
that.
Could be more even.
But it came to light that the firm that owns the parking meters, which is not the city of Chicago, but a private firm, wants to sell them to a New York-based investment firm called Stone Peak, I believe. That's still subject to city council approval, so there's some discussion, could the city use that leverage to get anything out of this, but I don't know how optimistic people are.
Yeah, I mean, because some of the terms of the deal are, fairly onerous. Anytime these come offline, the city has to pay them back. So you have to imagine alders might at least take a swing at getting out from under some of those. But again, we shall see. All right, Zareen, you had a really interesting piece this week about how some local bars and restaurants have become hubs for political action. What did you learn there?
Yeah, so we've been seeing a lot of these different types of protest events. So it's really, I feel like, stemming from a place of everybody just feels so unhappy, and there's an experience of rage everyone's feeling, and just the traditional protest or the traditional rally might not be suitable for everybody. And so restaurants, bars, and in one case, a bowling alley, which hosted a Chicago postcard protest event, what they're seeing is that people are liking this more targeted approach where it's a smaller group. And so with this postcard event, for example, it was very well organized. The organizers had like stacks and stacks of postcards. Very aggressive, it was like Trump's face on it. It was the 25th Amendment was eluded, and then they had like another sheet with like names of lawmakers, congressmen, congresswomen, senators, and then a sidebar of like what exactly they've done that's been problematic, whether it's immigration or what's going on in Lebanon or Gaza, and very, very targeted. And so a lot of the people there were like, we would love to pick up the phone and call our lawmakers, but are we really going to do that? So this is a great place for them to come, release their grievances. It's cathartic, and they just, and send it out. And then the postcards take up physical space on someone's desk, so that also is like very powerful imagery. And then another event that I was writing about in that story is an anti-ICE supper club. So it's actually the second iteration of a supper club. It was first founded by Anthony Bourdain and a guy named Nathan Thornburg through a company called Roads and Kingdoms. And so in the first Trump administration, they had announced something called the Banned Dinner Series, so Banned Countries Dinner Series. So it was countries that were Muslim majority were banned, and so they highlighted chefs from like Somalia and Sudan and Yemen to cook dinner for these people. And now the Anti-ICE Supper Club series is partnering up with restaurants across cities. Chicago had a 4-day stint. And it's a ticketed event. People come by. All the proceeds go to organizations like ICER or other immigrant legal aid resources. And another targeted approach. And I think restaurants, bars, and naturally the hospitality industry is trying to create these spaces for people where when you walk into that door, probably everyone in there agrees with you, at least on a moral level.
Sure.
And that itself is proving to be very powerful.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well, you hear a lot about folks who, sort of have this hunger for in-person connection. This is a way to do that, as you say, not in, maybe a massive rally of tens of thousands of people, but that they can still, sort of connect with their neighbors and folks in their community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also really important to note that protesters are not like one size fits all. They all look very different. Some of them are very elderly. Some of them don't really like going outside, but they still feel the same way and they still want to make a difference, at least make their voice heard. So organizers, and a lot of the organizers are the same organizers that do organize big events and big rallies and protests, but they've heard that we want to participate too. And so there's been a demand for a creative way to protest instead of like having to go and march down a street.
Interesting stuff. All right. Speaking of a subject of protest in recent months, Matt, you had an update this week on a long-running fight over whether clergy, ministers, religious figures can get access to Broadview's ICE facility. What's the latest there?
They won an agreement with ICE where Catholic and interfaith leaders will be able to provide pastoral services to detainees held in the ICE facility there on a daily basis. This is something that they had to go to court to agree to. The Department of Homeland Security, of course, pushed back, saying that this is a processing center. People are in and out of there overnight. They're not supposed to be there more than 12 hours. Of course, they were held there for days and sometimes weeks during the height of Midway Blitz. And the faith leader said that this is another level of care that these people deserve while they're there. That even though it is not a detention center, it had been operating as a detention center, and that they were entitled to this these faith services while they're held there. So this agreement, on a temporary basis, allows them to go on a daily basis and do just that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to imagine, Zareen, even if this isn't a detention facility, it's a processing facility, denying people access to, religious ministry is something that a lot of people would disagree with, even folks who are anti-immigrant.
Absolutely. I think it's taking away humanity when something like that happens. So having your faith leader, whether you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, is just instilling that human back into how it should be.
Yeah. All right, we are in the home stretch down in Springfield with the General Assembly. We heard Governor Pritzker reiterating the only two sites the Bears are considering are Arlington Heights and Hammond. But Talia, there was some reporting from the Tribune that, there are questions now from lawmakers about whether the city continuing to beat the drum for a Chicago site might soften some of the support for this mega projects bill. Do we have a sense of how likely that is given the lateness of the hour?
Well, it's certainly late. There's not that much time left in session. It's hard to say. I mean, the Bears have said, right, that there are really only two sites, Arlington Heights or Indiana. So how optimistic people should be, I don't know.
Yeah, and if they're saying they want to make a decision in, spring or summer, the time is running out pretty quickly.
I think it's wishful thinking, if anything.
It may well be. All right, Maxwell, one big development that is happening in Chicago is the Obama Presidential Center. That will be here before we know it. More details have been coming out about the grand opening next month. What do folks need to be aware of?
Yeah, so Foundation officials had said there's been so much demand for the on-campus celebration of the opening, which will take place on the 18th, ahead of its grand opening on the 19th, that they're taking the watch party for these opening ceremonies to the Midway. There will be what's essentially amounts to a community festival going on the Midway to kind of coincide with the grand opening ceremonies on the 18th, as well as the grand opening on the 19th and neighborhood events through the 20th and 21st. So yeah, I think that's really exciting for a lot of people, but at the same time, after Stony Island had been shut down for transportation improvements for so long, we also get a new round of road closures through June to accommodate this festival and the grand opening ceremonies. So definitely, as everything has been with the Obama Center, there's lots of excitement, lots of joy, and lots of, oh boy, here we go again in terms of day-to-day interruptions. So as messy as it can be, as exciting, as fun as it can be, it's all being thrown together yet again.
Yeah, so folks in the area definitely going to have some closures, some alerts to watch out for while this is all happening.
Most definitely, and mostly through June 15th through the 19th. A lot of the closures will go out of effect through the rest of that weekend. But yeah, at least a few days there. Woodlawn residents, Southsiders trying to get through the area, it will be much tougher than it usually is, which is already pretty tough.
All right, well, one thing that's not tough is talking to the four of you, but we are out of time, so our thanks to Matt Masterson, Zareen Syed, Talia Soglin, and Maxwell Evans. And before we go, a quick note about a special upcoming event. You're invited to join us for a WTTW News town hall about police community relations in Chicago. It's next Tuesday, May 26th at 6 p.m. at Talia Hall in Pilsen. You can reserve your free tickets at WTTW.com/events. Tickets are limited, so sign up today. Again, that's WTTW.com/events. Hope we'll see you there. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family. The Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that's our show for this Friday night. On a programming note, Chicago Tonight will be off on Monday evening for the Memorial Day holiday, but we'll see you right back here on Tuesday. Now, for all of us here at the Week in Review, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay informed. Have a great weekend. All right, the biggest story of the week, finalists for the names for Chicago's Baby Eagles. McGeezy means bald eagle in Ojibwe. Marion, a nod to Chicago environmentalist Marion Burns. Calumet, a play on Calumet. Any favorites?
That's the best one.
I think Calumet's the winner.
I think that's pushing it. There's puns where it's like Calumet. I don't know. I'm gonna have to go against that one.
Yeah, I guess Monty and Rose for Montrose Beach was a little
smooth,
easier.
Real smooth.
Yeah, Calumet feels like people are just
It's fun to say, though.
It is fun, but just asking to misspell it or mispronounce it. Or yeah. What's a Calumet? You know? But I don't know. I think they've got three good options there. We'll be very interested to see. Imagine that's going to get a lot of votes in there.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports educational initiatives in the legal profession.